We live in a world built on cities, grids, plumbing, zoning, trading. But what if one of the earliest urban civilizations mastered all of that over 4,000 years ago? This is the mystery of the Indus Valley Civilization, a vast and ancient culture that once stretched across what is now India and Pakistan, thriving quietly while Egypt raised pyramids and Mesopotamia carved out empires. For centuries, its cities lay buried beneath farmland and forgotten hills, its script undeciphered, and its people unnamed. And yet, their legacy still endures. Today, archaeologists are returning to these silent cities with new tools: remote sensing, isotope analysis, ancient DNA, even AI-powered linguistics, hoping to answer questions that have lingered for generations. Who were these people, and why did their civilization fade? This is the story of a forgotten world, one that challenges how we think about power, progress, and what it means to build a civilization. In the 3rd millennium BCE, the Indus Valley lay along the eastern edge of a region where agriculture had already spread from the Near East into South Asia. Its broad plains supported early crops, such as wheat and barley, and livestock brought east from the Fertile Crescent. These domestic species moved overland through Baluchistan, the rugged hills that connect the Iranian plateau to the Indian plains. The Indus River, fed by 5 major Himalayan tributaries, gave the Punjab its name, Punjab meaning 5 waters. These rivers brought snow melt south, turning forests and grassland into fertile farmland. Along the banks, crops thrived. Away from the rivers, pastoral communities grazed herds on open land. To the west, the highlands of Baluchistan formed a natural barrier, but not an impassable one. For thousands of years, traders, migrants, and herders crossed these routes, linking the Indus Valley to Iran, Mesopotamia, and beyond. The Arabian Sea, into which the Indus flows, offered other connections toward the Persian Gulf, Arabia, East Africa, and even southern India. To the southwest, the Ganges and Yamuna River carved their own fertile plains. These valleys would become the political and cultural heart of India. But in the 3rd millennium BCE, the center of life was here, in the Indus Basin. The region has changed since then. Around 2500 BCE, the rivers followed different paths. The Yamuna may have once fed directly into a larger river known as the Saraswati, a wide seasonal river that flowed through what is now the Thar Desert, running parallel to the Indus. To the south, the Aravalli Hills and dry plains separated the Indus and the Saraswati from the rest of peninsular India. That landscape supported small groups of pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, as it had for generations. In the west, the Indus reached the sea farther south than it does today. The Rann of Kutch was not yet a marsh, but a shallow inlet dotted with islands. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, the Indus Valley had become the most densely settled region in southern Asia. While other parts of the subcontinent were still home to small villages and mobile communities, the Northwest saw something new: a city-building civilization, with planned streets, specialized crafts, trade routes stretching hundreds of kilometers, and a culture that reached from the mountains of Baluchistan to the coasts of Gujarat. This was the Indus Civilization, also called Harappan, after the city where it was first studied. It covered more land than Egypt or Mesopotamia at the time, yet it left behind no kings, no temples, and no texts that we can read. Still, it was a civilization in every sense of the word. But this region has always been unstable. The Himalayas, still rising today, make the land below shift and fracture. Earthquakes, floods, rivers that change course. These forces have shaped life here for millennia. Sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE, the Saraswati River began to dry up. Its disappearance disrupted life along its banks. Cities declined, trade slowed, crafts and industries broke down. The Indus Civilization didn't collapse in a single event, but over time, its great cities were abandoned. The center of life shifted east, towards the Ganges Valley, where new traditions would take root. Even so, the Indus Civilization left its mark. Its patterns of life, its farming, its pottery, its layout of towns, echoed through the centuries. Though the names are lost and their script remains undeciphered, the civilization that grew along the Indus River shaped the subcontinent long after the cities fell silent. While the civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China left behind monuments and written records that shaped how they were remembered, the Indus Valley faded from view. By the time European scholars began exploring Asia's ancient past in the 18th and 19th centuries, their attention focused on what was still visible, like the Mauryan capitals of the Buddha's time and the megalithic tombs of southern India, which resembled those in prehistoric Europe. Excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro revealed the remains of large, carefully planned cities. It had broad streets, drainage systems, and houses with bathrooms. This stunned archaeologists. Carved seals bearing an unknown script added to the mystery. The Indus cities were quickly dated to the same time period as early Mesopotamia. A forgotten civilization had been found, and it had been very advanced. In the 1940s, the British archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler led further excavations, bringing public attention to the Indus once more. But by 1947, the partition of British India placed most of the known Harappan sites, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, inside Pakistan. In response to this, Indian archaeologists turned their efforts towards sites that were still within reach, especially in Gujarat and along the Indo-Gangetic Divide. Surveys in the Khalistan Desert of Pakistan also revealed ancient settlements along the now dry Saraswati River, suggesting that this river had once supported a wide belt of life. In recent decades, international teams have returned to major sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro using modern techniques such as remote sensing, isotope analysis, and soil studies to learn how people lived, worked, and moved across this landscape. Excavations into Dholavira and smaller settlements in the region have expanded what we know. The Indus civilization was not only urban and organized, it was also widespread and diverse, connecting city dwellers and village communities across thousands of kilometers. Very slowly, a fuller picture was emerging of the people who had built and sustained these cities. Much has been learned about the Indus civilization over recent years, but many questions remain unanswered. Chief among them is the most basic. Who were these people? Without a readable script, we have no names, no recorded events, and no direct voice from the civilization itself. The Indus stands apart from other early civilizations. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt, or China, there is no clear evidence of warfare, conquest, or royal power. There were no palaces, few buildings suggested a religious function, yet the civilization was highly organized. Its cities were well thought out, and its craftwork was advanced. Well-made goods were found even in small villages. Harappan merchants traded across a vast region, from Central Asia to Mesopotamia. Their seals have been found as far west as modern-day Iraq, but still we don't know what they brought back. No written accounts survive to explain their economy or society. After 6 or 7 centuries of urban life, the system unraveled. Cities were abandoned. Trade declined. The reason for the collapse remains debated. Climate change, river shifts, social change, or a combination of all three. What remains is a civilization that flourished quietly, left no known rulers, fought no known wars, and then disappeared. Centuries passed before the world would discover the silent cities of the Indus, and that rediscovery began not with a trained archaeologist, but with a war deserter. In the year 1800, a boy named James Lewis was born in London. By the age of 22, he had enlisted in the Bengal European Artillery, a regiment of the British East India Company, and sailed for India. At first, he saw action on the battlefield, but his interests soon shifted. While stationed in the company's garrisons, he was drawn into the world of natural history. Helping his commander curate a collection of zoological specimens, Lewis discovered something unexpected, a thirst for knowledge that went beyond the military life. In 1827, while posted in Agra, Lewis made a bold decision. He deserted the army, along with a fellow soldier named Richard Potter. Desertion from the company's ranks was a capital offense, punishable by death. To avoid detection, Lewis adopted a new identity, Charles Mason, and Potter became John Brown. The two disguised themselves as American travelers and headed northwest, crossing into the contested frontier lands of Punjab, Sindh, and Baluchistan. On their journey, they encountered Josiah Harlan, an American adventurer who had talked his way into the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, claiming to be a doctor, scholar, and military strategist. Harlan was building his own private army with ambitions of ruling a kingdom in Afghanistan. Mason and Brown joined Harlan's forces under false pretenses, but quickly realized they didn't share his goals. They ended up deserting again. Their exit triggered a wave of desertions from Arlen's militia, a betrayal that Harlan would not forget. John Brown actually stayed in Punjab and joined Ranjit Singh's army. Charles Mason continued west on foot, making his way into Baluchistan. In the late 1820s, he arrived at a large mounded ruin near the Ravi River. The locals called this place Harappa. Mason was struck by what he saw. Brickwork scattered across the surface, walls half buried, and a massive citadel rising above the plain. He made sketches, took notes, and interviewed some of the villagers. He did not know it at the time, but he had become the first outsider to document the ruins of Harappa, one of the major cities of the Indus Valley Civilization. In the years that followed, Mason traveled through Afghanistan, exploring sites around Kabul, Jalalabad, and Bagram. Fluent in Persian and deeply familiar with classical Greek texts, he immersed himself in archaeology and the study of coins and artifacts. Between 1833 and 1838, he excavated more than 50 Buddhist sites and amassed a collection of nearly 47,000 coins, many of them from ancient trade centers and temples. His work offered the first glimpses into archaeology of Afghanistan, Bactria, and the Greco-Buddhist world. Mason returned to England in 1842 after 15 years abroad. That same year, he published his findings in a book called Narrative of Various Journeys in Baluchistan, Afghanistan, and the Punjab. In it, he described and illustrated the ruins of Harappa in detail. Though he believed the site was tied to Alexander the Great's campaigns, he was mistaken. What he had seen was far older, part of a civilization no one in Europe had ever heard of, a civilization that was once stretched for hundreds of miles and then vanished. 2 years after Mason's visit to Harappa, the East India Company sent Alexander Burnes to study the Indus River as a possible route for military transport. Like Mason, Burnes stopped at Harappa. He noted the extensive use of baked bricks, but also observed how locals were carrying them off for reuse, unaware of their age or value. By the mid-19th century, archaeology in India began to take shape. The Archaeological Survey of India, or ASI, was formally established in 1861, just after Crown rule replaced the East India Company. Its first director, Alexander Cunningham, had visited Harappa in 1853 and returned again later. But by then, much of the site's upper layers had been stripped away. Cunningham believed that the ruins might be connected to a lost Buddhist city that was once mentioned by the Chinese traveler Xuanzang, but he could not confirm the link. Still, in 1875, he published one of the first interpretations of a Harappan seal, noting its strange, foreign-looking script. For several decades after, work stalled. In 1904, under Viceroy Lord Curzon, the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act was passed. That same year, John Marshall took charge of the ASI. He assigned Hiranand Strasi to survey Harappa, and Sastry concluded that the site was older than any known Buddhist remains. Soon after, Marshall ordered formal excavations. In 1920, ASI archaeologist Daya Ram Sani began work on Harappa's mounds. Meanwhile, farther south, the site of Mohenjo-daro began to draw attention. A series of ASI officers visited between 1911 and 1924. Among them, R.D. Banerjee made a breakthrough. On his second visit, he observed similarities between Mohenjo-daro's artifacts and those from Harappa, particularly the seals. M.S. Vats, another officer, confirmed the parallels. Convinced that something larger was unfolding, Marshall brought the finds from both sites together. On the 24th of September in 1924, he published a striking statement in the Illustrated London News, comparing the discovery to Schliemann's unearthing of the city of Troy. A week later, scholars noted that similar seals had been found in Mesopotamia and Iran, suggesting a shared time period. Excavations at Mohenjo-daro began in earnest in 1924 to 1925 and continued for years. By 1931, much of the site's core had been revealed. After India's partition in 1947, the ASI's work continued on the Indian side, especially along the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, thought by some to match the ancient Saraswati River. While many of these sites had Harappan connections, few matched the size or complexity of Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. As the geopolitical map changed, so did the focus of archaeology. Archaeology became part of a national story. It was a way to frame unity and cultural continuity. In Pakistan, where most of the Indus cities were located, interest in pre-Islamic heritage was much more limited. Much of the work was left to foreign teams, though Mortimer Wheeler, once head of the ASI, helped establish Pakistan's archaeological institutions before joining UNESCO efforts to conserve Mohenjo-daro. Over the decades, international teams from Germany, Italy, and the United States joined local researchers to study the Indus world. Meanwhile, in the early 1970s, a flash flood in Baluchistan exposed ancient remains near the Bolan Pass. Excavations led by French archaeologists uncovered Mehrgarh, one of the oldest known farming villages in South Asia, dating back thousands of years before Harappa. These discoveries, layered over more than a century, revealed a vast and complex civilization, one that had remained hidden under the soils of two nations, and whose story is still being written. We know a great deal about many ancient civilizations because they left behind texts. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China, for example, inscriptions and manuscripts record the names of kings, laws, religious beliefs, myths, scientific ideas, and the structure of daily life. The Indus civilization offers no such clarity. Its scripts remain undeciphered, and the examples we have, mostly short inscriptions on seals and pottery, are too brief and too limited in context to reveal much, even if we could read them. Because of this, some of the most basic facts about the Indus people remain unknown. We don't even know what they called themselves. We don't know their story, their laws, or the names of their rulers, if they even had any. Most strikingly, we don't even know what language they spoke. Today, most people in South Asia speak Indo-European languages. These include Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, Punjabi, and, as a legacy of empire, English. But these languages likely did not exist in South Asia during the Indus period. Indo-European languages are thought to have arrived in the subcontinent sometime after 1500 BCE, though this remains a subject of ongoing debate. One leading theory suggests that the Indus people may have spoken a form of Dravidian, which is a language family that is now spoken mostly in southern India. A related Dravidian language, Brahui, is still spoken today in Baluchistan, not far from the ancient Indus sites. Another possibility is that the Indus language belongs to the Austroasiatic family. These languages survive in scattered tribal communities in eastern India and parts of Southeast Asia. In the 3rd millennium BCE, they may have been more widespread across the subcontinent. It's also possible that the Indus script represents a language that has no surviving relatives, a completely lost tongue from a world we no longer understand. Without a key to the script, all of these remain theories. Until someone unlocks the writing, the voices of the Indus people, who they were, what they believed, and how they understood their world, will remain silent. The cities of the Indus Valley Civilization were remarkable for their time, and remain so today. What stands out the most is an emphasis on infrastructure, planning, and function. These were practical cities built for daily life, and they reveal a people deeply invested in order, sanitation, and community structure. Beginning around 3200 BCE, the region saw the rise of towns during the early Harappan phase, with full urbanization developed by 2500 BCE, in what is known as the mature Harappan period. Major cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro likely supported populations of 30,000 to 60,000 people, which is enormous by ancient standards. At its height, the civilization may have included 1 to 5 million people across a territory stretching over 1,500 kilometers, from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. These cities were laid out in a grid plan, with straight roads that crossed at right angles. Residential and non-residential zones were clearly separated. Most buildings were made out of baked brick, a durable material uncommon in many other Bronze Age cultures. Multi-story homes, workshops, and storage buildings stood side by side with wide avenues, fire pits, kilns, and wells. The settlements were often built on raised platforms, likely to protect against seasonal flooding. A signature feature of Harappan cities was their water management system. Public wells, covered drains, and a sewer system ran throughout the urban grid. Wastewater was directed away from homes into central channels, many of which could be accessed for cleaning, showing clear evidence of maintenance. In some cities, brick-lined bathing areas and even what appears to be flush toilets were connected to this system. Structures like citadels were built on elevated ground, separated from the lower residential areas. These citadels housed administrative buildings, storage facilities, and public halls. One of the most iconic features of Mohenjo-daro is the Great Bath, a large, watertight pool surrounded by small changing rooms. It may have served a ritual purpose, though its exact function remains unknown. At sites like Lothal, near the Arabian Sea, Harappans constructed a dockyard, complete with a lock gate system to manage tidal flow. It was located just off the main current to prevent silt buildup. Inland, artificial reservoirs were cut from stone to store rainwater or control floodwaters. There is evidence of dams and stone-lined culverts, as well as the use of corbelling, a technique used to create arches and vaulted drains. Harappan cities were also centers of industry and craftwork. Seal carving, metalworking, and bead-making flourished. Artisans used material like carnelian, copper, tin, and lead, often trading finished goods over long distances. The cities connected to an international network that reached Mesopotamia, the Iranian Plateau, and Central Asia. What is striking about all of this is not just the complexity, but the uniformity of everything. The building techniques, the street layouts, the drainage designs were consistent across vast distances. This suggests a shared civic model and possibly a strong administrative system. Yet we find no monumental temples, no royal palaces, and no signs of kingship or centralized rule. The people who built these cities clearly valued practicality, cleanliness, and order. They designed for the long term. Their cities were very much ahead of their time. Of all of the questions raised by the Indus civilization, two have drawn the most speculation: religion and writing. The two are often linked because much of what survived, carved seals and short inscriptions, suggests symbolic meaning. But without a deciphered script or clear religious structures, what the Harappans believed remains one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Indus city offers no monumental temples at all. There are no statues of gods or murals of mythic stories. What archaeologists have found instead are objects, seals, figurines, altars, and ritual baths, open to interpretation but difficult to place with certainty. This absence has made some wonder. Did the Harappans have formal religion at all? Most scholars believe they did. Religion has played a role in every known human society, but it may have looked very different from the state-sponsored temple cults of the ancient Near East. The Harappan approach may have been local, ritual-based, and less centralized, more like the religious diversity seen in South Asia today. Some seals depict what appears to be a seated figure with a horned headdress, surrounded by animals. Some have called this a prototype of Shiva. Others argue it reflects a fertility deity or a shamanic tradition. Small female figurines appear in homes and workshops, but their purpose is uncertain. Were they worshipped, played with, honored as symbols of household protection? No one really knows. Researchers have tried to decode the Indus script using clues from these religious images, and in turn, some have used proposed decipherments to build theories about Harappan belief. But this circular reasoning has led to more confusion than clarity. In the absence of readable texts, scholars have also turned to later Indian religious practices for insight. They've looked at patterns that have persisted: ritual bathing, symbolic animals, nature worship, and even the sacred layout of space. But the danger here is assuming too much continuity. What looks familiar may not mean the same thing. Across the Harappan cities, we see cultural uniformity in planning, materials, and technology. Yet when it comes to possible places of worship, there's a striking variation. A structure that might be a shrine in one city has no clear parallel in another. That lack of consistency is unusual for such a large and organized civilization, and it raises questions about how religious life was practiced and understood. Whatever their beliefs, the people of the Indus seem to have built a civilization without grand temples or priestly elites. Their religion, if we can even call it that, may have been private, pluralistic, and embedded in daily life rather than staged in public monuments. In Indus cities, the most common artifacts found by archaeologists are carved seals and terracotta figurines. These small objects tell us a great deal about everyday life, artistic traditions, and long-distance trade, but they also raise questions we can't yet answer. The seals are especially important. Usually made from steatite, a soft stone that can be carved and then hardened with heat. These square tokens often depict animals, symbols, and a line or two of Indus script. Most were carved in intaglio, a method where the image is incised into the surface so it would leave a raised impression when stamped into wet clay. These seals were not decorative, they were tools used to mark goods, seal packages, or perhaps identify merchants and origins. Seals have been found not only in Indus sites, but as far west as Kish and Umma in present-day Iraq. This shows that the Harappans traded with Mesopotamia, likely exchanging goods such as textiles, beads, ivory, or grain for silver, tin, or luxury items. The scenes on the seals vary. Some are crowded compositions, almost schematic, with stylized human figures and hybrid creatures. Others show a single animal, a bull, a water buffalo, a rhinoceros. These are often rendered with impressive realism and precision. At just a few centimeters across, they are miniature masterpieces. The figurines tell a different story. Most are made of terracotta and depict humans or animals in a range of poses. Some wear elaborate jewelry or headgear, others hold objects or appear in motion. Their purpose remains unclear. Were they toys? Ritual objects? Maybe protective charms? Without texts, we can't be sure. Scholars sometimes compare them to Mesopotamian figures or to later Indian folk art, but such comparisons really only go so far. One of the few surviving stone sculptures from the Indus world is the famous Priest King, a small but striking 17.5 centimeter steatite torso found in Mohenjo-daro. The figure wears a patterned robe that leaves one shoulder bare. His face is calm and symmetrical, with stylized braided hair, almond eyes, and a trimmed beard made from parallel lines. The headband suggests a person of high rank, but we don't know who he was. Some believe these small sculptures may have been portraits, not of kings or gods, but of real individuals. Other rare sculptures show similar half-kneeling male figures. Most are unfinished or damaged, and many of them are very small. The civilization did not focus heavy on monumental art at all. There's almost no large-scale sculpture in stone or metal. Only a few examples of bronze casting, ivory work, and faience modeling. What survives suggests a vigorous craft tradition, but not one centered on artistic display. Still, the Harappans mastered the technical skill of fine object making. They used lost wax castings for bronze, controlled firing to harden and whiten steatite, and had complex methods to work shell, bone, and semi-precious stones. One of the most famous bronze sculptures, the Dancing Girl from Mohenjo-daro, is just 10 centimeters tall, but full of movement and personality. Much of Harappan art was probably made in organic materials, wood, cloth, or leather, that have not survived over the centuries. Painted pottery, often with geometric or animal designs, shows continuity with earlier regional traditions. Some scholars believe textiles or wall hangings may have carried painted designs too, but without physical remains, that remains speculative. What the Indus left behind is small in size, but not insignificant. Their seals, figurines, and craft objects were deeply integrated into daily life, trade, and perhaps ritual. They may not offer a grand artistic tradition like Egypt's or Mesopotamia's, but they do offer a glimpse of a people who observed their world closely, and left behind traces of a life still waiting to be fully understood. By the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, the great cities of the Indus were already changing. New buildings stopped going up, streets fell into disrepair, long-distance trade declined. Some cities, like Mohenjo-daro, were gradually abandoned. Others faded into smaller, less organized settlements. There is no evidence of war or invasion, no fires, no mass burials. Why this happened is still debated. One likely cause is climate change. Around this time, monsoon patterns weakened. Rivers became less reliable. Some may have dried up completely. The Saraswati River, once a major water source, appears to have disappeared almost entirely. Settlements along its banks were left stranded in arid land. Another factor may have been tectonic activity. The region sits on a geologically active zone. Earthquakes may have altered river courses or destroyed irrigation systems. These shifts would have made farming and city life difficult to sustain. It's also possible that the civilization simply became too dispersed. As trade slowed and environmental stress increased, people may have moved east, toward the Ganges Valley, where new rivers, rainfall, and fertile soil offered more stability. What followed was a slow dispersal. The cities shrank, rural life returned, and the urban experiment of the Indus came to an end. But the story doesn't stop there. The people didn't vanish. Their traditions continued, transformed and adapted in new places and times. Pottery styles, weights and measures, town layouts, and even ritual practices show signs of continuity. Later cultures around the subcontinent carried forward elements first seen in the Indus world. The script may be unreadable, but its shapes still spark curiosity. The seals, figurines, and cities remain as evidence of a civilization that was advanced, organized, and deeply rooted in its landscape. Today, more than 4,000 years later, the Indus civilization still resists easy answers. New modern tools like remote sensing, DNA sampling, and computational linguistics are giving archaeologists hope that more answers may still lie hidden in the soil or locked in the script. Ongoing excavations at sites in India and renewed studies in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan continue to reshape what we know. We may never know what the Indus people called themselves or how they understood their world, but what they left behind, gridded streets, carefully engineered drains, intricate seals, and balanced trade, speaks to a society that valued order, skill, and connection. In a region often shaped by empire and conquest, the Indus civilization stands apart, a quiet, complex world that flourished without kings and without monuments to power. Its legacy endures, in the land, in the patterns of life, and in the quiet questions it still leaves behind.